This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast brought to you by Prize Picks, coming at you Tuesday morning. It's February 23rd, and we got a weird one to talk about today. It's not often you get to do a podcast about the team having a player who scores 62 points and losing. I've got Jace Frederick here with me to dive into this one. Jace, to talk about this game, there's multiple different factors. Obviously, right, the umbrella piece here is Cat has 62 points, 44 in the first half or whatever, and how that, adjusts the entirety of how that game is played. Obviously, Carl scoring 62 points is not the reason the Wolves lost the game. It's going to be the externalities off of that. What I have written down is no defense in the game, Ant completely removing himself from the game, Mike Conley not playing, and then how Chris Finch, I guess, managed that game from a coaching standpoint. What sticks out to you? And we'll touch on all those things over the course of this episode. But what sticks out to you as whether it's one of those things or something else as to why this team was able to lose a game where their star player scored 62 points?
I think as I watched the game, I was like, "Boy, they finally got caught." And just in the sense of not even so much this year, but let's just think in like the last year or two, how many times at like the ends of games or something, they start doing stupid things to get people points. Like Ant usually, like he needs 40 or whatever. And then it's just like Ant's like coming to the ball and getting the ball and firing up anything. And it's like, it's a 12-point game, guys. Okay, it's a 6-point game. Like that Spurs game last year where Greg Popovich got ticked, or 2 years ago, whatever it was, trying to get Ant like 40 points or some really meaningless number. And they almost lost because of it. And it was like, what he is doing, it's like, okay, I guess, you're a little younger. It's a learning lesson. They did it for 3.5 quarters on Monday night. Like, you got to be kidding me. Like, yes, Carl had a great first quarter. And from then on, and he had a great first half. But it was just like, get Carl the ball, get Carl the ball, get Carl the ball. They literally stopped playing basketball. Like, they didn't play basketball for most of that night. And it leaked into their defense and it leaked into their offense. It was like, you can do these things. You can ride a hot hand and still play basketball. Philly did it just fine.
Sure. They do it every game.
Yeah, right. That's just kind of status quo for them. But Minnesota was like, it was like, oh, it's not my night to shoot it. It's like, no, it's your night to play basketball.
I was gonna say, I think it's important that if people haven't like seen any of the quotes and stuff out of the locker room, that this isn't just Jace like saying this. The players cop to admitting that they just got out of the way and watched it, namely your superstar player. Let me play the Ant clip and then keep going.
We weren't focused.
In terms of, you didn't focus?
We wasn't focused from the jump at all. We was never focused. Cat just had a great night, and we wasn't focused, though.
He started out on fire. Did you think that the focus turned from winning the game to just trying to get him?
Yeah, for sure. I think, once he hit his first 6-7 shots, I think everybody was pretty much just trying to see him go get 100 points. I know I was, so, yeah.
This team has been so mature for most of the year and handled
Immature tonight.
Yeah,
for sure.
Why?
It's like that quote then goes on Twitter and people are like, do like head face palm memes and whatnot. And they're like, oh my gosh. It's like, why do you need to hear him say it? If you watched the game, you saw it. He didn't. He could have said anything, and I would have been like, I don't care what you said there. I saw the game.
And you knew the game was immature.
Yeah. And so like, great that he copped to it, because like, it's not like, oh, you can't be thinking that. It's like, if you watched the game and thought anything other than that, then I don't know what planet you were on. Like, Ant was literally like, it looked like he was just assist hunting. It looked like he was trying to be like, man, I can get to 15 assists tonight.
That was interesting, right? Like, there was part of me in the second quarter or whatever, and this was wrong, but I genuinely felt this thought where I'm like, there's something kind of cool about Ant's willingness to like let Cat go. I was thinking that early on in the game.
That.
And particularly that. when you think about the like, he's got $45 million, whatever, on the line for making all NBA this year, and taking a game where he literally had 0 points until there was like 2 minutes and 30 seconds left in the third quarter. Like, just as getting that money, having a 0-point game is going to hurt your averages. It's going to whatever, all those sort of things. And I was like, oh, Ant is like, Ant is openly and willingly doing this, and he's just empowering Cat, blah, 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 whatever. And then that shifted for me in the third quarter. When I was like, okay, he's decided to not get points, but he is assist hunting here. There's the most blatant, like, not taking shots that I've seen. Is like, it looked like in Ant's head, he wanted to have 0 points in the game where Cat had 60 something. And that was all like, that's the disrespect in the game that Finch talked about after the game, right? It's like that I liked what Ant was doing. I actually really liked the first quarter. I really liked the first half and going to Cat in the way they did, because it was just like leaning into something that's working and it was opening up other things. Then I do really think it started with Ant of just leaning into all the bad things about what that game was. And yeah, just not taking it seriously and caring about the wrong things and not caring about defense. He was kind of the poster boy of that last night too.
Yeah, it's like, okay, if you're not going to score tonight, if that's going to be your prerogative, like, I don't agree with just passing up anything, like, ever, trying to manipulate the game for someone's stats, your own stats, whatever. Do something else then. Like, okay, I'm not going to score tonight, so I'm going to defend my butt off. You know, like, I'm going to try to grab 10 rebounds to go with these assists. Like, I'm going to, drive and dish to Cat for, like, layups, whatever. Like, kick out for open threes. It wasn't that. It was on offense. It was just like, I'm going to pass and just sit here on the perimeter. And on defense, I'm going to sit here on the perimeter. Like, this is just kind of my night off. Mike took a night off. I'm going to kind of do that too. Yeah, it was super immature on his end. And Carl then, like, once Carl gets in the mode of, like, they're feeding me, they want me to shoot it. It becomes really hard for him, I think, to switch it into, no, I should keep making the right play. He gets very caught up in it as well and just started taking some hideous shots at terrible times. And yeah, I don't know.
Most of the fourth quarter, that was pretty much the fourth quarter where we got.
I would say late third.
Yeah.
There were a couple, and then like actually right before the 6-minute mark in the third is when he always subs out. So Finch subbed about then too.
Yep.
But Naz Reid went to the scorers table after Carl took a terrible shot through a double team, and that's when Naz went in for his regular thing. So there was a hint of it in the third, and then the fourth, when the lead really started to slip away, that's when it was like, the lights were flashing, like, oh god.
Well, and Finch kind of, I mean, Carl had been in for a while, but pulled him with 3 minutes left in the game too, after another one of those forced shots. And you're like, okay, there's Jaden McDaniels, Kyle Anderson, Rudy Gobert, Nikhil Alexander Walker, and Anthony Edwards on the floor here with 2.5 minutes to go. And it's
part of that is very much, I think, like, well, we can't match up with them defensively otherwise right now.
That was the bad part of Carl's game. I mean, even in the first quarter, it was, I don't know, I have to go through like the tracking stuff, but I mean, he scored 62, but his man was probably responsible for 38, 40 points in this game. It was one of Carl's worst defensive games of the season for sure. And, there's somewhat of a trade-off there. I asked him about that after the game, like, if you're scoring 60, like, how much can you do defensively? And he did lean into that much, obviously, but
he scored 50 against the Hawks once, and Mike Muscala scored like 26 on him. Yeah, so it's not.
Yeah, and that's just like, that's not even necessarily a Cat thing. That's the most guys who score 50 probably aren't doing much on the defensive end. But in that game, you needed it. He didn't get picked up by his teammates. That's the point. Is like, if he was going to play this way and have this type of game, then actually, if you're Carl's teammate and you want to empower him to go get 80 points or whatever, how you do that is guard, and just shore that end of the floor up so you can win the game when your teammate is doing that.
So if he's taking a terrible shot in the fourth, you're up 20 and it doesn't matter, versus like, oh, we're up 6 and we're taking terrible shots with 7 minutes left.
So
the bad shots thing, I'm sorry. It frustrated me to no end because it was so not required. Because, like, why was he even in the post in these points where doubles could come? Literally, the first half was top of the floor.
Pick and pop.
Pick and pop, top of the floor. Either Charlotte just didn't cover him on the pop because Charlotte doesn't communicate, defend anything. You had a great clip, or like, and if anybody even just like took a jab step to contest the three, Carl just walked by for a layup. Like, I loved your clip of like, Cat's
LaMelo in the corner.
got 48 or whatever, but LaMelo's making sure Jade McDaniels doesn't get that three. I've never seen a team care less about help defense. I mean, like literally, like look at PJ Washington, like got cooked again, man.
Yeah.
You know, like what are you doing? I had my guy covered. Like,
it was bizarre how the only person in Charlotte gear that seemed at all bothered by Karl having 40 points in the first half was Steve Clifford.
Yeah, yep.
Like
and there was second half Bridges, but the first half Steve Clifford.
It was they're calling timeouts and they could not. I mean, they had no centers in this game. Like that's a big reason why this happened, and they just had nobody who understood how to navigate pick and pop action. And then like that was actually what was really encouraging to me about the first half. It was like, all right, Cat and Akil have this pick and pop action game working. And then, they're trying to load up on it a little bit more. So Rudy like inserts himself into the play where he's like, okay, it's Cat and Akil pick and roll here or pick and pop. And I'm going to go screen Bridges off of the pop because now he's going to be scrambling back to get to Cat. And there was just like some of those where you're like, wow, like let's put this down on film. This is a pretty much undefendable action if they run this more, which they never do this stuff. Like the Wolves do not use Karl Anthony Towns and pick and pop at a high volume whatsoever. He's a middle of the pack frequency 3-point shooter in the NBA. He's not a high volume 3-point guy. And I thought there were so many things you could take from that first half of being like, man, there are opportunities here. Like this is how you play to stop being a below average offensive team. You put this more into your mix in the first half, Chase. And I
know. I don't care. I mean, I know exactly what you're saying. I know you're excited about it. It's great. Did you watch Charlotte play defense in that half? I mean, like I've never seen a team try less. At least in the second half, like Thor showed a little pride, and that's when Karl picked up an offensive foul on the drive because there was some resistance. Like I understand the action was cool. There was no resistance to anything. You could have run anything you wanted to, Dane, and it didn't matter. It didn't matter.
I hear that. Do you not agree that running that type of action for Karl Anthony Towns so he takes some damn threes is not part of the answer for making this team an above average offense that is inexcusably a below average offense, right?
I agree with that. I think yes, you can mix it in and it'll bump it a little bit. I think you're going to ever achieve any type of those results on any consistent basis against a real defense. Not
okay.
Not
sorry.
Like, you're not going to replicate anything even close to that. But a couple times a game, mixing it in with certain lineups and whatnot to make it, like here's an answer for us in certain spots for sure. Like much better than a lot of what they do. I think Karl at the top of the floor and different ways you can be like that is you can't
better. Double him there.
You
can't double him there. He is. That's why I started talking about this. Is you started talking about him going into the post and trying to get points in the post and getting doubled there because Karl has not learned how to handle that yet.
Right.
He that has been, 3-4 years. I mean, actually, it's dating back to the 2017-18 playoffs where the Rockets started doubling him in the post in the first round and it completely shut him off. Like there is a book out there. I've talked to other team scouts about this. They go, if we're ever worried about, Karl Anthony Towns doing this, we know we can shut that off with double teams whenever he's on the interior. That is, and that might hurt us elsewhere. Like somebody else might start making some threes or get Ant going, maybe get some Rudy lobs, whatever. But there is not the Wolves do not have an action that they can go to over and over again to empower Karl to generate offense because they frequently do not use him as a 3-point shooter, or he does not use himself as a 3-point shooter. My point of this was maybe this is an action that you can run more of, lean into more in your offense that can get you good offense through Karl Anthony Towns that is better than what you normally get by giving him to the ball in the post or telling him to drive to the basket where, he fouls and turns it over and all those sort of things. I think this is the path to playing better offense with Karl Anthony Towns. You're right. It's not going to be anywhere as obviously as easy as it was against the Hornets.
Yeah, it was. I agree that pick and pops where it's catch and shoots with some semblance of space. That's the best answer because that is the thing that you can replicate. The step out, blow by drive is not in the sense that most teams have a defender, even smaller ones, plenty of small defenders give Karl all sorts of fits. But you have to be willing to be some type of physical. And Washington and Bridges were just like, I don't want to play play defense. And so then that led to layup. But I agree that it is at least a way to generate some threes, like even quick trigger, whatever, the space to get it off. That still, though, is like a mindset thing for Carl. And like, yeah, they all went last night and it was easy and it was great and cool. So yeah, I think you've got to find a way to generate it against good teams, and maybe that action will get you a few looks. I
asked Kat about it after the game, just about 3-point volume, but he did say they're looking to get more of that. More of a driving to the basket season for you than a 3-point. I think it's one of your lower 3-point volume seasons. Yeah. Does a performance like this, where you're just taking maybe more difficult threes, feed it all into like, all right, I can boost my 3-point volume too in this? Or is that even a good idea or not? Like, are you comfortable with that?
I think it's a good assumption. I feel like this 3-point shooting game. I'm not talking about the makes. I'm just talking about the attempts. It was on the horizon for a while. I've been talking to the coaching staff a bunch and my teammates, and I understand the challenge they want me to take, which is shoot more threes. And it was one of those nights where I decided, I wouldn't say decided, but the more threes was given to me, and I had really good looks at them, and I chose to shoot them over driving and just take what the defense was giving me.
Here's the thing. Chose to take what was given to you. Everything was given to him. But so that's the thing for me, is like, it has to be a shift of like, even when it's not an obvious time to take one against like better teams, you still have to be comfortable taking it. So if that is what like turns the faucet to on for him, great. But I'm going to believe it more when I see it against like you had some space to get it. It wasn't an obvious shooting situation. I need to see like you really flipped the switch and understood that this is your role in the offense. And like a lot of great shooters out there, some breathing room is enough. Like it can just be like a step where it's like, like a lot of guys where it's like, I'm just able to get this off, so I'm going to take it. And like, until Carl develops that, then that's when it's going to be required for me to believe that any like revelation has been made.
Yeah, like we always talk about this where, and I don't think Carl's actually not shooting threes over the course of a game or a season because he's like, oh, these ones are more difficult and that's going to get my 3-point percentage.
No.
I don't think that's what he's doing. But
I think he's just like, this isn't a good shot. Like I think it needs to be flipped up. This is a good shot.
This is super distilled down, but I think he goes, is this a shot I think I have over 50% chance of making, even if it's a 3? Like, I literally think that's where his head is typically at in shooting those. Otherwise, let's pump and go. Like, because I believe if I can get a pump and go 50% of the time, like, or more than that. And now, one's worth 3, one's worth 2, whatever. But I think if that is some of the thinking, rewiring some of that to be like, hey, maybe there is just value in you shooting 9 threes tonight, just to shoot 9 threes tonight. We're going to run design pick and pop action with Mike or Ant, or, we are going to hammer this action over and over again in the middle of the third quarter where you're in the corner there, and you're probably going to get 2 or 3. Like, I really think, as much as we, point the finger at Ant for getting the turnovers under control and some of that stuff, and the rewiring that he needs to do to make that, like, it's just the sacrifice and the change that these two players, the two best offensive players on the team, need to make to elevate what has been a bad offensive team this season. And I actually, like, it makes sense in my head that this could move the needle for him. What did you say? Turn the key or whatever. That it's like, okay, I can shoot more than 6 threes a game. I'm Karl Anthony Towns. It's like, you need to be shooting. This is his lowest 3-point shooting season since like
the
Tibbs year.
17, 18, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, like I was talking about this with Britt yesterday. I mean, this isn't true after last night, but Nas coming into the game last night had played 400 fewer minutes than Karl this year and taken and making more threes than him. And like, yeah, there's a little bit of a change in how they're guarded, but like,
not really. I mean, and
right, like
for Nas, it's coming off of like ball rotation, catch and shoot. Like Karl's getting those same opportunities when the ball does rotate.
It's just Nas is never going to give you that like jab. Right. Like, right. Am I coming? Am I going right here? Like
either playing off the catch or shooting it. Like there is no jab. Yeah, right. I think we both agree that Nas is more adept at playing within the flow of an offense.
Sure. Karl. And Karl's more adept as a shooter, better at pick and pop game. Like that's the trade. But it's like, for the two of them, if you could kind of meld some of that stuff together, like, I don't know. Nas would get better at what he's better at.
It does, like the difference between them as shooters levels out a little bit when Nas is at least willing to take and understands when to take them. Like that makes you a better shooter if you understand when to take them.
Well, and even when Nas is taking bad ones, you're like, oh boy, like maybe Nas shouldn't play. You know, like when it is kind of that
but it's still a bad catch and shoot three. You know, like I'm still like, it wasn't really there, but you know, it's one of those things where like if 80% of the ones you take are good, then I wouldn't want to rewire it to where you're thinking too much.
Yeah. Let me grab our first break here. Today's show is brought to you by Falling Knife Brewing Company. If you're watching on YouTube, we have their schedule up on the screen for the week. They have obviously they have the Wolves and Wizards game on Wednesday, Wolves and Nets game on Thursday, Wolves and Spurs on Saturday. Those are all road games. So you're obviously not going to be at Target Center for those. Those are opportunities to go watch the Wolves there. But also the main thing we want to kind of be pushing right now is they are having a Super Bowl party. If you do not have Super Bowl plans, Falling Knife is having a Super Bowl party that is, it's a $50 ticket, is all you can eat, rectangle pizza, wings, nachos, that sort of food. Plus that $50 ticket comes with 2 pours of anything, 2 beverages that you would that you want from there. Otherwise, or a pitcher of beer is another option in substitution for that. So if you are interested, don't have Super Bowl plans and want to check out Falling Knife for that, you can get a ticket in advance. Go to their Instagram at FKBC, and the link for those tickets is in their bio there. That's Falling Knife Brewing Company in Northeast Minneapolis. Chase, I want to talk about Mike Conley.
I just love that the game circled back to where we could talk about Mike Conley after he didn't play.
Yeah, but it did.
Only way, but
it genuinely did, right?
Yeah.
This isn't just like us being like, "Oh, sorry about Mike Conley again." Like
and now for the Mike Conley segment.
Yeah, but it like, I mean, the Boston game was good, right? When Mike Conley didn't play, until it wasn't, you know, and it was the immaturity. It was this stuff, you know, focused on the end of the game in Boston, you know, in the end of regulation and overtime, where they missed Mike Conley. Obviously, last night they missed Mike Conley to kind of. There was just so many instances. I even at the time was like, all right, I think Mike would have just been like, maybe we're just going to go to me and Rudy pick and roll in the like 2
possessions in a row.
Yeah.
And it would have been a dunk for Rudy against Charlotte last night.
Oh yeah.
I honestly, I think I said this at one point. I was like, Carl had like 40. I'm like, honestly, if they came into the game with the mindset of like, let's get Rudy 20 dunks, they could have done that.
That's true. They could have done anything. Like they could have.
Because he could have said, I'm going to score 60, and he could have just driven to the hoop and laid it up. I mean, like, it was,
I don't know if he could have got 60. I mean,
no, you're right. You're right. Because
like,
requires a lot of shooting.
Yeah, he could have had a big game, and that's just why they shouldn't have lost this game. Is how bad Charlotte is defensively and was indifferent defensively in that game.
And then randomly in the fourth quarter, Charlotte was like, they hit a few shots, and then they're like, maybe we could win. And I don't really like what Minnesota's doing to us. Let's try a little bit.
It just leads to the whole interesting Conley conversation, right? About like how valuable is he to this team? And we don't even need to do like the going into next season sort of thing. We've talked about that a bunch.
Yeah.
That is its own thing. But Mike Conley this season, and I don't know, you know, a lot of that game got a lot of eyeballs on it last night. So you see some of the national people tweeting about it after the game, and it's like number one need for this team is backup point guard. And like, obviously that's maybe like that is a need, and they only have J-Mac there, but it isn't necessarily a backup point guard that they need. They need to play the way they play with Mike Conley on the floor when Mike Conley isn't on the floor. And I don't know if you just go get like Monty Morris, or whatever, you know, that you've still got that Mike Conley thing that you need in the 15 minutes a game that he sits out. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know if this it is a problem of how they play without Mike Conley can be solved by just getting a backup point guard. I think they need literally Mike Conley to be able to, to sustain in these games.
When Minnesota played in Charlotte in December, Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels didn't play. Minnesota trailed late, and they won by 6. And it was because they made 9 shots in the fourth quarter, and Mike Conley scored or assisted on 6 of them. In the final 90 seconds, they had the ball at 3 points. Cat took a bad shot. The next time down, Conley got the ball, ran a pick and roll with Gobert, and then Conley got an and one out of it.
I remember that.
Same team. Didn't have Ant, didn't have Jaden. Had somebody who just knows how to play late in games and won. I mean, like, it's sometimes it just kind of sometimes feels like he's a little bit of like a linchpin for what they have, because like I think his mere presence hides a lot of immaturity. Like they haven't looked immature much this season, and then they just do. And then they do, and it's when Mike Conley's not out there, it's like he is such a requirement, I think, for them to have fewer of these super dumb looking performances. Yeah. It's like, wow, they've done so much better against bad teams, all this stuff. It's like, I think Mike Conley just being out there is a big reason for that. We talk about how Rudy dominates the games on the interior and stuff. And like, it's still true last night, grabbed a bunch of boards and whatnot. Wasn't as great defensively. But it's hard to be when there's literally no resistance. I just like, I think if they didn't have Mike out there, they would probably have like 6 more losses.
Well, I think they're last year's team.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I that's where it's just like, well, what's changed? It's like, oh, we've really locked in defensively and all this stuff. It's like, well, what changed is you got Mike Conley in February, and it took a little bit of time. But now
Ant's grown some, and
probably because of Mike.
Yeah, that's true. I think Rudy has obviously grown some and improved, but that's largely because of Mike too. So
everybody sees Mike and Rudy work, and then you're like, oh.
And I you know what I honestly think
Rudy's healthier for sure. I mean, that's,
that's true too. I think Mike Conley is just one of the best players in the NBA, and I just don't think that registers with us in terms of like winning. Finch used the term winning quotient a couple of games ago. It just has one of the highest winning quotients. I don't mean that like he's a top 10 player, but like, you pull 100 people who watch the NBA like decently frequently and are smart. And honestly, even if you talk to, I guess let's put us in that smart category and watch it. We wouldn't have said that. We wouldn't have said that a year ago. We wouldn't have been like Mike Conley's a top 40 player in the NBA.
No.
Like,
and we thought he was good. I think we were both very pro like him as a trade target in like a deal trade and everything. Like we saw the Utah Minnesota games. It was like Mike Conley's really good, but you don't understand how good until you see just the pure impact on a team on a nightly basis.
It's because it's not just the 3-point shooting, being a 45-46% 3-point shooter. It's when he's hitting those shots.
Yeah.
It's not just that he's a good defender. It's when he's making those good, smart defensive plays. It's not just that this team, needs to be slowed down at times. It's that Mike Conley understands when that needs to happen, like a possession before it happens. And that leads to an extremely outsized impact on the game. And it's one of those situations where you go, man, this is captured in the advanced metrics. Like you go through of like the, who are the most impactful players on this team. And Mike Conley is up there or above even a Karl Anthony Towns or a Rudy Gobert. It's all right there. It's not like there's the big three and then there's Mike Conley and Jaden down there. It's Mike Conley is just as much up there, and numbers aside, he just, to me, looks every bit as important to this team as those players or very, very close to. So,
I mean, think about like clutch time. Like they are now negative net rating in clutch time for the season. Ant is negative 12.7. Karl is negative 10.7. Where most of those numbers come from? The Boston game and the Charlotte game. Yeah. And obviously, like I think the Dallas game wasn't awesome, but the Boston game and the Charlotte game were the biggest ones right now. Mike's not on the floor for either of them. The Boston game for me is like the ultimate. Hey, Mike's not out there. You actually can get bigger and more athletic and maybe match up a little bit better with like a Boston.
Boston's a tough matchup for Mike.
Yeah, for sure.
So is the Thunder. Yeah.
Yep. Athletic, strong, whatever.
Mike's 5'11", small dude.
Yeah.
Like he's just not a big guy.
So it's like And this is why teams have like gone away from point guards. They're like, we can like just have somebody else bring the ball up the court, and we have a bunch of guys who are at most like at smallest like 6'4". We match up with anybody. We can switch a bunch of things, all this stuff. Like that's why Boston did it. And it's great for 45 minutes. But how many times do we see Boston fall apart in the playoffs late in games? And now how do we see Minnesota fall apart late in games? Because like a floor general matters. And for Minnesota, I think like they would show up a lot more if there wasn't a floor general out there. So yeah, like you can be bigger defensively, like even better, like even match up with literally anybody. But then you fall apart when it matters. And that's why when you say like Mike Conley's one of the best players in the NBA, Mike Conley's one of the most important players in the NBA. It's like, because do you want to win the close games late or do you not? Or do you just want to look good for 45 minutes? Because, Ant, Cat, whatever, like it's going to look great for 45 minutes, but not when it actually matters.
This game, this type of clutch performance happened all the time in the first 5 months of last season before they traded for Mike.
2 years ago.
Yeah.
They lost in the Memphis series. They and the entire season leading up to the Memphis series, because
Cat and Ant have a lot of strengths, but they struggle still at this element of the game, the end of games, the shifts that have to happen there, to be thinking about the game differently than the previous 43 minutes of the game. They do that is not a strength of Anthony Edwards or Karl Anthony Towns, and you just listed off their clutch time numbers this season.
They're horrible.
It doesn't mean they're horrible players.
Right.
It means they need somebody who's good at that to balance them out. And Mike Conley and Rudy Gobert, who are probably a step down overall from them of Cat and Ant as players, are really good at that. And it's not just Mike, it's Rudy too. I am so impressed by Rudy in the last 5 minutes of games. I literally think that switch on the LaMelo Ball at the end of the game is one of the best defensive plays I've seen like ever. And certainly this season, given the time, score, situation, other best players good at exactly that, attacking bigs and switches, as LaMelo is, to completely shut that off. I mean, it's why in many ways this roster is constructed well. As great as Karl and Ant are at the things that they're great at, they need to be supported by two players like Mike Conley and Rudy Gobert, at least for now. Maybe Ant and Cat mature and that changes over time.
Maybe Ant matures. I mean, Karl's old enough. I mean, you got to stop talking. Like, Karl is who he is at this point. You're at this point in your career, like you are who you are.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing, and I'm not just doing the like pining for Cat thing here. I wonder with Cat if he can learn from being on a good team, a great team like this team is, and if they lose this year, can he have a mentality shift? I'm with you that's probably like unlikely. It's kind of the main thing I think with Ant too. Only 22 years old. Like a lot of these things that we say, Ant probably needs to change, become like a superstar MVP type caliber player. I wonder if he has to lose in the playoffs because of it to change. I wonder that with Ant, and I wonder if some of that is true with Karl too. Like if you lost a playoff series because of something that like this that happened last night or the Boston game, does that hurt enough to change some wiring inside of you? If you're
so the Boston game, you're talking about the whole Memphis series. Yeah, I think it really flipped a switch for him. They blew 3 double-digit fourth quarter leads, and then you come back to Boston 2 years later, and you're doing the same thing.
Clearly, it didn't. I'm just saying, I less so believe it with Karl Anthony Towns. I'm saying it is extremely likely at 28 years old, he is what it is. I'm not, but I don't know. I mean, maybe there's a small way it could change with Ant. Yeah, that happened in the Memphis series, but he was 20.
Yeah. Yes. No, I agree. I agree with that. I mean, I don't think he's really changed any way that he approaches late game spots.
Ant or Karl?
Ant. Sometimes he'll kick out in an obvious situation and whatnot. So that maybe is like some improvement. So I still have hope for Ant doing that as well. Karl, it's just like he's got pros, he's got cons. I think you just have to swallow it as like this in a vacuum. Here's who he is, and it's what it is, and you decide what you want to do with that.
To be clear, that's totally the way I'm leaning, and I think it's 90% that. And maybe it's just being optimistic or something. is a hope that like more in the crucible of a year where you could maybe go to the finals. And if you don't, because of some things, maybe that rattles something and changes. I don't know. Because both Carl and Ant need to change these things, like they need to change these things. And I guess what I'm asking in my head is what could instigate that change? That's the question.
I mean, I think just for me, it's like this team could win like a championship, I still think. And I think their hope is just that Mike's out there and safeguards it for everybody. Like, yep, we've got these guys with these major warts at the most important times of games, but we also have Mike. And so maybe he can steer the ship. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if when push comes to shove, late in games in the playoffs, Chris Finch is much more assertive and goes, give it to Mike. Give it to Mike. Give it to Mike. And like, you're not bringing it up. Stop coming back for the ball. Give it to Mike. We will get you a shot in the offense. I think like there are so many things that people are annoyed with Chris Finch. Why doesn't he do this? Why doesn't he do this? It's just, you can't do it in game 42 of a regular season. It's those like little shifts that are much harder. I guess I shouldn't say you can't, but
yeah,
they're harder to make. Like levers are harder to pull because then you've got a whole full season to play and you hurt feelings and whatnot. And it's much easier to do in the playoffs when it's like, nope, our season's on the line here. We're going to do what is required to win right now.
I want to talk about Finch. Like how much blame in this one goes on to Finch in the like couple of minutes I spent scrolling through Twitter, like replies to, Finch had that. Actually, this is the way to start talking about Chris Finch is to play the beginning of his press conference from last night.
I thought you were going to scroll through Twitter live.
Chris, what happened in this one to let it slip away?
Well, I mean, it was an absolute disgusting performance of defense and immature basketball all the way through the game. So it really didn't slip away. It had been there from the jump. So this is what happens when you have this type of approach.
You saw that from the beginning
Oh, yeah.
of the game right through the
For sure,
fourth
yeah.
quarter.
Yeah.
How do you go about trying to right the ship when you see it's like that from
My bad.
minute
I
one?
kept, imploring them to try to compete and play some defense.
I'm just pausing this right now. This is not our audio. This is the audio of the press conference. Apparently Jace just screamed into
I
the
just
microphone.
screamed into it.
I'll keep. Let me go. No, I'm not going to go back to playing your screaming part, but we'll continue. Finch. I actually want to play this part of the questions because I think a lot of people saw the, Finch is like that was despicable, whatever, blah blah blah. And you asked right here some questions about like, well, what did you do about it? And that was what all the responses I was seeing to like that answer from Finch was, well, you're the coach, dude. Like, make those things happen. This is what Finch said about that.
Switching back between man and zone, anything to contain the ball, push it, get up on the shooters. Just messages weren't getting through. So
It seemed like all season when Carl or Ant start the first quarter off and just scoring a lot of points, it's coming pretty easy. That leads to the team's worst basketball.
Yeah.
How do you address that? Because there are going to be quarters where it's good when they start out hot, but not have it lead to bad team basketball from there.
I mean, listen, you're spot on. I mean, there's lots of times when just because you've scored 2 or 3 or 4 points in a row or baskets in a row, it doesn't, obviously we're going to try to feed a hot hand, look for a hot hand, but at some point we got to get back to making the right play. We got to get back to doing the right things. That's just, like I said, there's a lot of ways to be immature. There's always a lot of ways to be immature. And there was a lot of immature performances here throughout the roster. We totally disrespected the game ourselves, and we got exactly what we deserve.
So did you clip Finch talking to Britt and saying, here's exactly what I said?
Yeah, I did.
Play that.
Yeah. Message at halftime.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. What I said at halftime was, why don't we start getting back to being who we are and play some defense and not let this game fall down to a point where we miss a bunch of shots and they make a bunch of shots and then we're behind. That's what I said at halftime.
So, and sitting there post game, Ant had already talked. He's just talking to Jordan McLaughlin, but at an audible volume that anybody can hear. And he just goes, and nothing was even said about it. He just goes, looks at J-Mac and he goes, That's exactly what he said was going to happen. Me going to miss some shots. They're going to make some shots, and we're going to be losing. He said it. That's what happened. Like, just out of the blue, like he hadn't heard that that's what Finch said post game or anything. He's just like recalling what Finch said at halftime, and he's like, "Yeah, he was right." You know,
and that's why Jason, and that's why I can't put this one on Finch, man. This one was on the players, and I disagree with Finch about some stuff. I think like there is maybe a world in which Finch's style doesn't line up with this roster. And I don't know, maybe we get to that point. We have that conversation a couple years down the line or from now. I just think given this roster and how it plays, I disagree personally with the style in which Finch wants this, this team to play offense. I disagree with Finch and I'm honestly a little bit disappointed by his insistence in closing games with the guys who are highest in the pecking order, salary or whatever, because it seems like don't want to like ruffle feathers there. Like I disagree with some things about Finch. I don't know, man. I can't get to last night being Finch's fault. And yeah, like he subbed in Kyle Anderson for Cat with 3 minutes left to go in the game, and then Kyle Anderson did throw it out of bounds, and that sucks. But like, I'm telling you, man, if you're one of the people who are like, why did Finch put Kyle Anderson in for a defensive sub? Like, watch the defensive clips on Carl in that game, man. Carl is really, really, really dropped off as a defender over the last few weeks and Carl was doing the tap himself on the chest. Was messing up on defense consistently.
Clearly there was a time where it was supposed to be help or even a switch. Kyle Anderson on a screen, and there wasn't. So Anderson was just left the trail up, open layup, and Anderson
was
just threw his arms up. Yeah.
And Carl was like, credit to Carl, who actually isn't a big, like, that one was on me guy. He had 3 or 4 of those on defense last night. So that's why Finch put Kyle Anderson into the game. I mean, I would have put Kyle Anderson into the game in offense, defensive subs. Like we talk about all the time, and I really believe this, like small, fast teams, when Carl's at the 4, are going to be really problematic to guard. And like Charlotte's not a good team, but like stylistically, they are Sacramento and Oklahoma City, small, fast, go, move the ball type
Dallas without a center in that game. They played 2 teams without centers, and they've lost.
Yeah.
And I keep saying like small ball, and people are like, they lost because this and this. I'm like, okay, but it keeps happening against the teams that don't play centers.
Mm-hmm. And it's not because of Rudy. And it's not because of Rudy.
It's not because of Rudy, but it's because of, but Rudy's not the one who's out there, but it's the 2 bigs thing. And it's one of the 2 bigs oftentimes. And it's defensively, like you're giving up anything.
And sometimes it's Rudy on offense, unable to punish it, whatever on the other end. But
it just disrupts everything for them, and they just have not figured it out. And that is a look, especially in like the first round, where like the other team is like, we are outmanned here. They're going to go to that if they have any capability to do it, because they've seen now Dallas is an inferior team. Like Dallas had a good year. Dallas is an inferior team. Charlotte is significantly inferior, and both teams beat them.
What should we be thinking about this defense right now? Like,
well, I don't think they can guard anybody when the team goes really small. I can't say they can't guard at all, but it is way worse. It's just they're just not dominant if you go really small. So it's on them. At that point, it turns into more of a scoring game. So that's where I'm at with that.
What did you think of I'll play it, but the like what the defense needs to do question. I'll play that clip, but Ant was asked about like what is needed to get the defense back on track. I thought this answer was interesting.
What do you guys have to do to get back on the right path as far as defensively as well? Going into the next game, just to refocus.
We just got to stop worrying about offense as a team. Everybody, whether we make a shot, miss a shot, not getting the ball. I think that's the main thing. Is we just focus on locking up on defense. I think we'll be able to get back on track sooner than later.
I kind of do agree with that. I think like a lot of when there is offensive disconnect, it goes into the other side of the floor. And I think they have more offensive disconnect when they're playing against the bad team, where they're like, okay, well, we could all score 30 here, like who's gonna get it? It's a little discombobulating. And then it shows up on the defensive end. Also because they're like, how hard do I need to try against Charlotte or whatever? But I don't know, man. That was a really bad defensive game. 4 worst defensive games this season. The worst one in terms of ranked by defensive rating. Worst one was at Phoenix. That was that back-to-back after Golden State. Next worst one was at Oklahoma City the day after Christmas, which was like a back-to-back on like baked goods or whatever. And then the third worst one was the home loss to the Pelicans, where they had absolutely no answer for Zion Williamson, which, the biggest rivals to a good Wolves game right now is a back-to-back or a scoring playmaking power forward that the Wolves don't have matchups for because of the defensive players they have at the 4. And then the next worst game defensively was last night against Charlotte. And the bullet point I have underneath that is not back-to-back. It's Cat's 62-point game. And I guess what I'm trying to say is there are these like external factors that really can dysregulate the Timberwolves defense. And that is awesome that the Wolves have the number 1 defense. And it is so clearly the best defense in the NBA. If you're watching the rest of it, just eye test. But it can really get thrown off. And I don't know if that's all like a regular season thing or, can we anticipate it to be fully locked in the playoffs? But I do think like in the first round, if I had to guess, there will be 1 or 2 games where the defense just like isn't there. And that's an interesting thing about defense, whereas like if they were the number 1 offensive team, I don't think I would go be like saying, all right, this first round matchup against the Mavs or the Rockets or whatever, that I would expect there to be 1 or 2 games where the offense is bad. Do you know what I'm saying? Like there feels like a volatility in this defense, even though it's very good, that is different than being a great offensive team. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I honestly think it very much comes down to the Cat matchup, whoever it is in the given game. Like you've said power forwards before, like that, then like they have to, when it's like a Zion or Julius Randle, it's like either Cat does it or they have to like shift around their matchup so much that everybody's kind of at a little bit of a disadvantage because you're just so worried about that best player and how do we best defend him. And now all the matchups are really weird. Right. The same thing was with Memphis and whatnot. Like there's a lot of these where it's like, okay, you're guarding you and you're guarding you and none of these are good for any of you, but I think they think it's the best like of treading water. And then like, or it's the really small, like where it's to me, like the small ball where there's always a release valve, where it's just like you can't constantly pressure everybody because eventually it's going to get to somebody who they've either left open on purpose or like it's like Rudy's on him and he's just with 16 seconds left on the shot clock isn't going to be up in their grill. So I just don't think you could be as dominant. And then I do think like just when scoring comes easy, they just shut off. They're like, no, we don't need to do this hard defense thing tonight. That's effort. We don't need effort. We can just score. But I do think like it's just going to be matchup based. Like if they play Houston, I think the matchups are so natural that I do think they would play pretty good defense for every game. I just think there are certain matchups where like when the other team can just turn off the pressure momentarily within a possession and reset by kicking out to the guy who's not being guarded or not being guarded tightly and run like a dribble handoff off that or something. That's much easier for them. And obviously if you have no centers on the court, you can do that. Or like a power forward where the Wolves just can't really match up. That's a release valve in itself. So I just think it's really hard to dominate teams when there is an obvious thing on the court that you can go to. Maybe it's like a 35% 3-point shooter just taking an open 3, where it just isn't going to look as great. And that's, I think, part of the problem.
It does seem like for a team that has this good of a record that like they are exposed in some ways. And I don't know if that might just be one of those examples of like, we're watching this team every single game and we're hyper focusing on that. And I've honestly really wrestled with that. Just like thinking about this year, it was like, am I overanalyzing and like nitpicky, making that space in the armor where, right. Like that, where they can get stabbed.
Because every team has
bigger.
them, but there are some common threads between losses in my mind, like that. It doesn't surprise me that it was Charlotte because Charlotte just has 5 shooters on the court at all times, and they weren't physical and they didn't even try to defend, but Minnesota couldn't defend them because it's 5 shooters on the court, which like Minnesota just can't lock them down the same. Even if they brought their best defensive intensity, Charlotte would have gotten a lot of 3-point looks last night.
This team defensively would be even better if it was 8 years ago, 10 years ago, where like the frequency with which you would catch a team.
I was like, yeah, because now it's be 14 in the NBA. Gotcha.
Yeah, no, I do. I think, and it's obviously it's the best defense
right
in the NBA right now,
right.
But it is this type of play, like randomly Charlotte's like, yeah, we're just gonna we'll play no centers against the team with two of them. Dallas did it too in that game where they were, without Luka, and that just wouldn't happen like 10 years ago. It just wouldn't. But it is a reality of this season, and it's a reality of what they're going to face in the playoffs. Even if they don't catch one of the teams that naturally plays small, those teams are going to try to do it. They're going to try and find themselves. Like Houston will try to find
it's
themselves.
At least going to be
it's
at least going to be like a 2-0 heading back to Houston. First two games you lost by 12 and 16. Houston's going to be like, what do we do differently?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to go. I mean, you're not going to take Şengün off the court, but you're going to go 4 around him. You might not play Jamari Smith.
Yeah.
Much,
Dallas is probably the best example of that, of like a series they clearly would be favored in, and then at just some point they go, no, 5 out.
I can see Dallas doing that from game 1, frankly.
That's true. And again, it doesn't mean that the Wolves would lose to that.
No, I still think they would win. I just think there's a couple games where you'd be like, yep, I lost that one. I think we could go 6, and you'd be like, well, it shouldn't go 6, but every game's going to be like 120 to 110, and it's whether Dallas hits shots or not.
Yeah. Which is to the point of that hole in the armor, whatever that we're talking about here. Like, if they do that, they're seeing that to be a bigger hole in the armor, or as big of a hole in the armor as we do.
It's just smaller teams. Like I did the math on open shots, like open or wide open shots per NBA.com. Like in the Oklahoma City series, it's 164 for Oklahoma City. It's 111 for Minnesota in those 3 games, like of open or wide open shots generated and taken. Yeah. And like last night, Charlotte had more open or wide open shots because it's just the nature of the way size works out. Like they're going to be able to space the floor and find somebody with a pretty decent look. And you're just like, hopefully they don't make this one. Even if you are defending at a high level, like even if you are, they can kick out to PJ Washington and be like, shoot this one at Gobert. Like it's not going to be, we just need you to take this shot, this possession.
Just have 2 quick notes to plug in here before we wrap this up. We do have 2 tickets to give away to the Dallas game on, I think that's a week from today, or next Wednesday, the 31st. Again, as we've been doing all year, Patreon subscribers, just send us a message that you are available for that game. Again, that's January 31st against Dallas, and we will give away two tickets. I think that's the next home game, just in general. And then also, the show is presented by Prize Picks. There is the NFL slate is up there. I haven't had the time to go look through specific picks yet. We'll do that later in the week. But check out for the conference championships if you want to get a Prize Picks slate put together there. And we always say use the promo code Dane at prizepicks.com or on the Prize Picks app for a $100 sign up bonus. I feel like this 50 minutes went fast, and I feel like we didn't hit on some things, but I don't know what those things are that we didn't hit on. Is there anything that's just lingering in the back of your mind you want to hit before we wrap this?
Not from that game.
Yeah, it was a weirdly that game was just about this
one
thing.
They did the same thing for the whole game. I mean, it literally was here's what the Wolves are trying to do, beat one person. That was honestly a game where they probably should have scored 140 points.
Yeah.
As a team.
Or Carl maybe should have.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, yeah.
Yeah. No, because they could have, if the goal of the game was to score 140 points in that game, they could have. But to have done that, Carl would not have been able to score 75 points, and that was, that's an interesting part of this. And, we're all like me and you or people or whatever are kind of like rolling our eyes at the like, well, why did they just let Carl go and do all this stuff? And it's like, man, that's what basketball players do.
Yeah.
Like
I agree.
it's like, and in the NBA too, it's not that different. It's like, I got like so-and-so got their 30 or like he got a 50 piece or whatever.
Yep.
Like that stuff matters.
Yep.
And it matters to the good and smart teams. It matters to everyone, you know.
Mhm.
There's this is the entertainment business and they get paid for the entertainment and they get like Carl will benefit somehow from having a multiple 60-point games in his career now, you know.
Right,
And there's
right.
there
And fans were having the time of their life in the first half.
absolutely,
You
man. It was incredible. We
Yeah,
went 8
yep.
for 8 from
Right.
3.
Torian Prince.
That's true. But like that's a factor in all this that I think is worth acknowledging.
Yes,
Right.
yep.
That stuff matters. It mattered, you know, at halftime when we all had the Philly game on. You know, it mattered to Nicholas Batum and Tyrese Maxey and whatever when Embiid was sitting there and at 62 points himself and the franchise record was Wilt Chamberlain at 68. Like they empowered him to go do that. It happens across the league, and to some extent, like that's okay. It's part of the game. It's recognizing when the pursuit of that puts the result of the game in jeopardy and getting out ahead of that and not letting that happen. And that moment came significantly earlier than when they stopped running the offense completely through Cat, right? Like
Right.
there should have been an awareness to shift that. But I also want to say, I get it, you know,
Yeah.
like if you or me were out there, we'd be like, yeah, man, like
Get to
let's get
Carl.
Carl 70, you know, like
I would be dribbling at
would.
Carl and giving him the ball and doing a dribble handoff like screen every possession to be annoying.
yes,
You know,
yeah,
like
and everyone would. It's basketball. It's fun.
yelling,
It's fun.
shoot it. Yelling, shoot it as soon as I
Yeah.
pass it to him.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah, so I think that's just, you know, we spent 50 minutes being like, why this was bad and why Mike Conley, a defense,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
all
yeah.
these sort of
Yeah, yeah.
things. But like,
I know, because I'm sure the people listening were like, "Shut up, it was cool," and it was cool. I
until
get
it wasn't. Mhm.
It's cool until it wasn't. It's totally just like
And it wasn't cool for those guys in the locker room.
No,
they
no,
they
no,
were not like
no,
that was
no.
fun. That was cool afterwards.
no.
Like, yeah.
Ant tried to say it in like the most I'm sad tone ever. Like, shout out to Carl, that was cool.
I know.
You know, like it was like glad we at least got that.
Yeah.
It's like, to me, it's like Philly got it, and in my mind, I'm like, well, you can trust Philly, and I think you can trust Minnesota. I just don't think you can trust Minnesota when Mike Conley's not in the game.
Yeah. Philly plays that way, like night to night. Obviously, the Wolves don't play that.
It is a
way
total
night to
shift
night.
for Minnesota, right?
Yeah,
right,
significantly more than it is
right.
for Philly. But again, like it could be whoever else around the league that had if somebody had 34 or whatever in the first half, random player X, their team would try and get them 60 in the second half. You know, like that's part of the game, and I just think we should acknowledge that.
And I just can't get past the size thing, man. Like everybody is going to keep saying it's dumb, but Charlotte swept Minnesota last year. Charlotte almost won in Charlotte this year. Charlotte beat Minnesota last night. Like,
So Charlotte, I said, is their 4th worst defensive rating game of the season. It's also their 7th worst defensive rating game of the season.
There you go.
The one that the last time they played them too.
Yep.
Like
Yep.
they've gotten burned by the Charlotte Hornets.
5 shooters
defensively.
on the court.
No, it is the concern for the number 1 defense in the NBA. It is something that can hurt them, and it's pretty easy to deduce. You know, you have 2 big guys, and the rest of your team's pretty big too. And that those other teams, every team can put out a smaller, faster lineup than the
Right.
Timberwolves put out.
Ideally, it's just not that. And Charlotte, this is one of the cases. Just the worst case scenario is that it's Oklahoma City and those players are talented. You know, like, and they're all threats and they're all good and they're all 2-way players and whatnot. Like, that's why that's the worst case scenario. Usually, if it's like a Charlotte, if you just play the game the right way, yeah, they might score more than other teams do, but you'll still win because of other factors. But yeah, that is a weakness for them.
Well, Jace, that was a weird one to do an episode on. You know, they gotta, you just gotta flush it, right? You gotta learn from it. I don't know what to say, man. I mean, it is what it is.
It's just like I hope that these are things that they do learn from, because like it was when we watched San Antonio 2 years ago and everybody has fun with it and whatnot, like, and it was just terrible watching like the shots they were taking as San Antonio cut like a 14-point lead to like 5 with like, and maybe even 1 possession with like 30 seconds to go. It was like, what are these guys doing? And they just, and they always do that when like a statistical thing comes into it. They just can't. They can't, like, if you're going to do it, lock in defensively. Like, I understand that you have to get stops. Like, you can't just stop playing basketball both ends. And they did that last night, and they finally got burned by it. And you hope, like you mentioned, the playoff thing, like, hopefully that Ket and Antival from playoff losses, like, just take things more seriously when you finally lose a game like this, which was kind of a long time coming, frankly. Not just for this season, but the way they handle situations like this in the past.
Oh, yeah. No, that was a great point that you said of, like, all the other times where Ants had 40 in a game with 7 minutes to go, and it's like, can I get to 50? Like, that's happened, I don't know, 10 times in the past, like something like that over the past 3 years with Ant. And yeah, it was a great line to start off. Like, they got caught. They got caught. They messed around doing that sort of thing before. And hopefully the learning lesson is, or even if you're Finch, you can be like, maybe it's on Wednesday and Ant has 40 points in the fourth quarter against Washington. And he's like, all right, like, are we going to continue to keep playing the game that's got us to this point? Or are we going to try and get Ant 50 points? Because if that game's close and Ant tries to get 50 points, the likelihood that they lose that game goes up exponentially. And I do think that right there could be the learning point of that, or at least Finch has that like in his pocket to point to. The Charlotte game, the 62-point Cat game, because right, like this, they haven't lost a game for chasing points, right?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. No, nothing comes to my mind. There've been some, that got way closer, but usually you're chasing points when you're up like 12.
Exactly.
And then it's like, oh wow, that got close. This was more of a weird one of like, yeah, you're up 10, but there's 8 minutes left. You know,
right.
I just really think they thought in no way, shape, or form that they were going to lose that game, and it didn't until like Charlotte took the lead, and they were like, "Oh, we might lose this game." Like, it wasn't even a thought in their mind that they could possibly lose that game.
I was trying to keep it not a thought in my mind, but I'm like, okay, 4 points.
Yeah, I mean, like I mean, it's and Washington is such a similar trap that I don't think they'll fall into it 2 games in a row.
Right.
But
yeah, no, the assumption is still something closer to Portland than what happened against Charlotte when they played these terrible teams. Because Brooklyn's not terrible, but it's Wednesday is Washington, Saturday is San Antonio, who just gave up 70 points to Joel Embiid last night. Like, there's more of these, I don't even want to call them traps. They're just like holes that you can fall into if your eyes are closed, right? Like, right. There are those type of games, and
you see the traps right in front of you. Yeah,
like,
hey, don't step in that.
Right. Yeah. All right. He's Jace Frederick. Follow him on Twitter at Jace Frederick. Read him over at the Pioneer Press. Next up, Chris and I are going to talk tomorrow after shoot around. So it'll only come out probably a couple hours before the Wizards game. We'll probably maybe talk a little bit more about this game, but also a little bit, more broadly. It's just kind of how we have to make the schedule work with Chris being on the road. There won't be a pod immediately after the Wizards game. The plan is Wizards on Wednesday, Nets on Thursday. Kyle and I will kind of talk about both of those afterwards. And then I'm going to try and get an Oklahoma City person on at the end of the week to talk about that next matchup coming up too. I think that's a really interesting one to dig into because the Wolves play the Thunder on Monday. But Jace, thanks for doing it. Went a little long. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Dane.
Until next time, he's Jace at Jace Frederick. I'm Dane at DaneMooreMBA. Until tomorrow with Chris. Peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hot so you can find me in the crowd, yeah. Don't let standards ever bring you down, yeah.